Throughout my working career, nothing has generated more wealth for me than selling and flipping and generally having the cars that I own increase in value. And that has caused a current reality that is a ridiculous, irresponsible, and disproportionate distribution of my net worth into cars. And certainly the greatest culprit of all of that is manual transmission Lamborghini Murcielago LP640s, my favorite car. That kind of results in two different realities. One is that every day I wake up knowing there's a reasonable chance that I may make a crazy decision and buy another one, but also that I'm always trying to be involved as they transact. And so I keep track of all of them. I've got a list on the VINwiki app. I had a list on my website before that. And I know that there are so few of them, it's pretty easy to know where they all are. And so people contact me looking for cars. I help them find cars that might be for sale. I help people that are curious about their car, research their cars. I just love being around the conversation of the cars, and I've become, I guess, attached to the idea of Lamborghini Murcielagos and their rarity and transactions and things like that. A couple of weeks ago, I get bombarded by messages from people telling me about a one-of-one Monterey Blue manual transmission LP640 coupe that is listed on Cars and Bids. And so I talked a little bit about that and the fact that it was immediately interesting not only to myself, but to Stradman, to a guy named Alex Lambo Jesus, to Houston Crosta, who has the crash car from Daily Driven Exotics and has owned a bunch of these things. I knew Stradman kind of wanted a newer manual Mercy. And so everybody is interested in this car and we all start throwing in low bids. But I was a little bit shocked to see the car show up on Cars and Bids. Now I was very familiar with the car because again, there aren't that many 23 US manual LP640 coupes, 88 in the world, only one in Monterey Blue, and this particular car had 49,800 miles, a high mileage for a Lamborghini, and in fact, the car that I went on a road trip in my Verde Draco car earlier this year to curate it and back so that I would once again have the title of the highest mileage manual LP640 in the US. Got a few miles to go to be in the world, but certainly that is the plan. I knew that the car had been for sale, listed on cars.com for about $1 million for about a year or so, and I had spoken to the seller long before he listed it and generally just knowing that he owned the car and that one day he probably was going to try to sell it. And I knew that he really wanted something in the mid-8s, which was consistent with what I thought the car should bring. You know, low 8s in worst case scenario, high 9s potentially. It could tickle $1 million. And in fact, I made an Instagram post saying, how much do you guys think this car is going to bring? Mostly because I wanted people to think about my cars in the future values that they might have. And most people were saying 1.1, 1.3, and that was consistent with the recent really top tier manual LP640 transactions that had happened. A Roadster sold for 1.3, a Coupe sold for 1.2, and these are perfect low mile, no paintwork examples. Now this car was presented in kind of a unique way, and the fact that it was on Cars and Bids was kind of unique for what the car is. Now the car was obviously high miles, was a very desirable spec, but that spec had been modified a little bit. Roy Katz of Katz Exotics was the original owner of this car. I've done business with Roy for almost 20 years, sold him a bunch of cars, bought cars through him. He's helped me with a lot of deals, and I remember this car because he drove it a ton. I think about 25,000 of its miles. And during the course of his ownership, there was always a story about some damage that happened to the front of the car. Now, it wasn't described all that specifically, but the stories varied from they were going between 150 and 190 miles an hour, either Roy or his son, and they had run over a railroad track or a harsh dip in the road and had broken the front bumper. Now, a front end accident is meaningful. A front bumper replacement or repaint is really not that big of a deal in a car's history, but as we've talked about with the VINwiki app and whether you should ever post something bad about your car, whenever someone's imagination takes over in terms of whatever the accident could possibly be, relative to the idea that they know exactly this is the extent of the damage, it changes their perception and their willingness to trust whatever the seller is presenting them with. So the auction disclosed that there had been some front-end paintwork in a very specious, ambiguous, hard to understand way. Also, there were some modifications to the car, including an exhaust, a bunch of radar and laser equipment, and a fully reupholstered interior that was different than what it could have had in 2007. Ad personam as a way to customize the interior of your Lamborghini, and sometimes they categorized exterior colors as ad personam options, didn't become available until late in 2008, really in 2009. And so the car was originally equipped with yellow calipers and yellow stitching and Alcantara inserts in the seats. A really, really nice spec for 2007. You couldn't have gotten blue stitching until later, but that's what the new interior was. They'd done a full carbon fiber steering wheel, stitching on the dash in blue, stitching on the seats in blue, Cusatura still with Alcantara inserts. And so a very nicely done car that is entirely sort of inbounds, except for as the car becomes super valuable, that's a little different than a perfectly stock presented car. Those were all issues that, like, when you think about a car that should sell at a top tier auction, you always want the best of the best to show up. And this really wasn't that. It was in the Ed side of the spectrum. And so I was a little bit concerned that it might have a really low auction result. Now, of course, this guy's owned the car for, 4 or 5 years. And so his cost basis is a small fraction of what the car is worth now. And I knew he was ready to cut it loose. And that's what one should be planning to do if you list it on one of these sites. Letting a car like that not meet the reserve or not actually sell is a bad thing for sort of everybody involved. The seller, prospective buyers, and other people that own the cars, because it just calls into question, like, what are these cars worth? Generally, when a Lamborghini Murcielago is in a public auction, I raise my hand a lot. If you look at my bidding history on any of these things, I'm always bidding on Lamborghini Mercies. I love them, and I'm always willing to buy them at the low numbers, but I know they're probably gonna bring more, and generally the market's gone up a lot in the last few years. I was bidding, 200, 300, 400, knowing that this was not in the vicinity of what this car was worth and that I wasn't gonna get it. And sure, if I did, that would be a wonderful thing. Now, just a short time ago, the most expensive car ever to sell on Cars and Bids had transacted, and it was a white Canadian market LP670 SV, another Mercy. Now, that car had sold a few months prior on Bring a Trailer, and it had done $880. So a 20-25% discount for the car showing up again on Cars and Bids. Bids may not have been all that legitimate on Bring a Trailer. The top bidder obviously never paid, and so that's why it was relisted on a different platform. And ultimately, that seems to have been an entirely legitimate transaction. And so again, that was under what we thought the car should be worth, was under what other people seem to have said it was worth. And so the concern is always, are the big bidders actually showing up on Cars and Bids, or is it more of a buyer's market there than it is more of a seller's market on Bring a Trailer? In all cases, there's evidence to support different conclusions, but I knew there was a liability the car might go cheap, which is both interesting to me to own and scary as someone who has a lot of his personal wealth tied up in comparable cars. So I'm watching, and with about 3 days to go, I'm the high bidder at $710,000. And so there were some underbidders in the high sixes and things like that, but everybody that I talked to that was also pretty interested was expecting it to be 850, whatever. And I thought that the reserve, based on some conversations with the seller, was probably a good bit higher than that. So the next day happens, I'm still the high bidder. The next day rolls around, 1 day left on the auction, I am still the high bidder. The morning of the day that the auction is going to end comes up, still the high bidder, it's gonna end, 2 o'clock, something like that. I end up texting the seller and saying, hey, if it ends here, are you gonna let me have the car? And I was kind of hoping he would say no, and obviously kind of hoping that he would say yes, but either way, I really didn't think it was going to matter, because generally in these auctions, the last 10, 5, whatever minutes is when the action begins, and the bidders that have been sitting on the sideline come into the ring and they flex their muscles and pay big money for stuff. And so I was hoping, for the sake of what my cars are worth, that that is exactly what would happen. I was not necessarily thinking there was any chance I was going to own this car, but again, happy to fulfill my obligation as a high bidder if that was the case. Now, 20 minutes to the end, 10 minutes, nobody's bidding, 5 minutes, ticks down, and it ends. Now, that could end and it could say, bid to $710,000, meaning they chose not to lift the reserve and sell it to me. Or, as could have definitely happened, they saw Ed Bolian is trying to buy my car. That's such an exciting outcome. We'll lift the reserve and we will let him have it. And that is exactly what happens. And it says sold for $710,000 to Ed Bolian. And as I watched that auction tick down to a close and eventually reveal that I am now the proud owner of yet another manual transmission LP640, it was kind of like finding out that your wife is pregnant with another child. I mean, you've put yourself in a situation where this could happen, and you know that somehow you're going to find a way to make it work, and that you're just not as ready as you thought you would be or hoped you might be, and it's all gonna be a wonderful thing, and it really is exciting, and you tell everybody that you're really excited, but you have no idea what's gonna happen, what's going on, and in this case, I hadn't even told her that it was going to happen, but you kind of just wish it would have happened later, or maybe even to someone else, but you're here, and it's time to make it happen. Of course, immediately people start bombarding me with congratulatory texts. "Yay, I'm so glad that you won." And I'm like, "Yep, me too. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait." And then, strangely, 5 people within 2 hours offered to buy in for half. I guess they understood it was a sound investment, didn't want to deal with having it, storing it, owning it, driving, and they just thought, "I'd love to be along for the ride with Ed." And so that was not something I'd ever really considered, and something I turned down immediately, but a very, very strange thing to have happen, when they didn't try to buy the car themselves. Now, I had barely read the listing. I had not spoken to my wife about the idea that we might spend more money than we've ever spent on anything ever. I had not Well, I absolutely knew that I could not write that check because I have a lot of really valuable cars, but I don't buy really expensive cars. For instance, the LP670 SV that I just sold to the sports car collection in Denver was really a $140,000 430 Scuderia that became a $185,000 SLR that became a $320,000 SV that became a lot more comparable to what I was now obligated to spend on this. But that Mercy-shaped hole in the garage wasn't really supposed to be filled with a Mercy that quickly. It was designed to be a little bit of a net worth shift towards a more responsible adult arrangement. But I was now obligated, and I was going to need to call Premier Financial Services very quickly. And fortunately, they were able to approve the deal just as fast. And so I was in a position to do so. I had no garage space, and I needed to sort of fill in a gap. Let's call it a down payment or a cap cost reduction. So I called a few people, including Chris Benvey of McGovern Auto Group, and sold the Scud, the newer one, the yellow 09 430 Scuderia, to them. I think it's going to go to Ferrari of Long Island or one of the dealers in their group. And so that, cleared a space in the garage for the car to park, also helped take a dent out of the purchase price. And if you'd like to own a wonderful yellow Scuderia, you can look them up. Now, the seller of this Monterey Blue LP640 that was now mine was waiting on a lien release, which was a beautiful thing. It meant he was not actually able to sell the car just yet. He had the title, needed a lien release to go with it, so he could legally transact this car. And I told him, I said, on Wednesday, I've got to fly to Monterey to do several things around Car Week. And then over the weekend, I'm going to drive up to Montana to Sway's headquarters for Sway Day, their open house. And then after that, we are going on a Sway expedition. So if you follow along, I hope you join us at the open house, but you'll be able to see where we are going on our Sway expedition. The Cayennes that we have prepared for everything are going to be put to the test. And so I'm going to be on the road for about 3 weeks. I said, could we just finish this up in late September? Of course, as somebody who's made a lot of money on a car, he and his wife are very excited, and he says, no, I need that dealt with sooner. I said, well, just let me know when you have the lien release, and I'll do my best to figure it out. It comes in late on Friday. I book a flight. We go up on Monday morning, and of course, they're excited to be, having this great win in the world of car ownership, a feeling that I have reveled in many, many times, but I was kind of on the wrong side of it in this moment. But at the end of the day, I was very, very excited to have another manual Mercy. They are my favorite cars, and the only real option was for me to road trip this car home before, again, I got on a plane to fly to Car Week. And so we've got about a 13-hour drive that becomes delayed a couple hours because of the way they wanted to be paid, all fine. And then we get on the road, of course, to run into a flood in DC during rush hour. The whole road's covered in water, everybody's freaking out, flashers on, all this stuff. And so we get stuck there for another hour. We don't quite make it. I thought, what, we're gonna do this drive in one day. That was not the case. We slept for 4 hours and made it in the next day. And the car did normal Mercy things. It threw an airbag light on, both check engine banks, occasionally a passenger occupancy sensor, a couple weird noises, the things that you generally expect. And we'll talk about whether that gets resolved with him and whether or not he actually represented it that way, or if that's just what you get when you buy a car. Because obviously I didn't send the Lemon Squad out there to fully inspect this car like I should have, like anyone should have, because I didn't think that I was going to win the car. But I was now its owner. I was on the way back, and we had a nice drive. I didn't push it too hard. Sticker on the windshield saying, make sure you change your oil in 2018. And that was really the problem with this car, is that it hadn't been driven because the guy was so scared to pass 50,000 miles. Which begs the question, what does it actually mean now that I have obviously passed 50,000 miles and driving the car 900 miles back here to Atlanta? A huge amount of money difference in a 51,000 mile car versus a 49,000 mile car. But as the cars all age, they all sort of get driven. That matters a lot less. 20 years from now, nobody cares. And so it's the way I like to buy cars, the way I like to own cars. But I am still the person that spent the most money ever on cars and bids. But fortunately, a couple of days before my fateful winning bid, I received a batch of photographs from Dustin Whirls of Techademics. And he said, "Ed, are you bidding on this car? Because I think I have a bunch of pictures of it." And he sends me some from a Joyride rally that they had done for Mischief, but also from the Players Run, I think in 2008. And that actually showed at the end of the event the damage that had happened to the car. And in speaking to Roy about what happened, yeah, they hit something and they kind of just scuffed off all of the lower part of the bumper. So rather than being, say, I don't know, 3/4 or an inch thick, the lower leading edge was now 1/4 or a 1/2 inch thick. And so it was all black, and you could tell like it hit something hard and fast, but it really didn't displace it. I think they broke a couple brackets and they ultimately ended up replacing that $18,000 carbon fiber front bumper rather than trying to rebuild with Bondo or whatever else the case may be. But he sent me a bunch of service records, and the car, despite having a bunch of crazy owners like Randy from Savage Garage and a rental company at some point, and obviously had a lot of miles, it was also the cheapest one ever to have been listed for sale. I think it was listed for $169,999 sometime when I was at the dealership, so probably 13, 14. It was on consignment with Jim Lyons at Sports Car Company. And so now it is the most expensive car to sell on Cars and Bids, hopefully to be trumped soon, because I think that there's definitely a lot more valuable cars out there. But it has made its way to my house, and of course I have filled that mercy-shaped hole in my heart and in my garage. Whether you see the car in person or buy it sight unseen, when you buy a pre-owned car, you need to get an inspection done by a qualified professional. And the nationwide network of trained inspectors from the Lemon Squad is the best way to accomplish that. They give you a great deal and a great bit of information about any car you're looking at very quickly. They've been supporting VINwiki now for 2 years, and I use them personally because when I'm buying a car, I need to know the full story. So check them out now at the link in the description below and use the code VINwiki for 10% off, and never buy a used car without the Lemon Squad.